Good to have you, Doc, and thank you very much for your time. The lawfulness of the peace officers has now been addressed, even though the second phase of the training is still to fall in line. Is this adequate in terms of what the public protector would have expected the Premier to rectify?
I must admit to being quite discombobulated by this briefing. There seems to be an impression that there is a single set of something called peace officer powers, which everyone who is declared as such in terms of Section 334 gets. That is not the case. What Section 334 does is allow the minister to refer to particular people, for example, liquor officers in Gauteng, to have very specific powers in specific jurisdictions. Now, traffic wardens throughout the country were already there was already a declaration in Section 334, but the limitation was as they were limited to issuing Section 341 notices, which is basically traffic fines. So there was quite a limit to what they could do. Now, that is appropriate because traffic wardens have very little training. They're generally people who are aspirant traffic officers. Traffic officers, on the other hand, have a very rigorous training. It is now actually almost equivalent to a university degree. And traffic officers have a far wider set of those peace officer powers, quite extensive. So what is absent from this press briefing is a clear understanding of exactly what powers have been given to traffic wardens in addition to the Section 341 powers that they already have. If it is equivalent to traffic officers, that would not be appropriate because they simply do not have the similar kind of training that traffic officers have. And although Premier Lesufi was talking about additional training for them to have, I happen to know that it's a particularly rigorous program, and law enforcement officers in municipalities often try to convert to becoming traffic officers, and quite a large fraction of them fail because it is not a simple qualification to get. So without actually seeing the notice, it's very difficult to understand exactly the ambit of their powers. And I was hoping Premier Lesufi would answer the question of the questioner in the press briefing, but unfortunately he didn't. Though there was a question around that. He began talking about the kinds of things that the Amapanyaza have been doing already. Now, the other problem is the act which they are using is the National Road Traffic Act. Now, that act requires that for anyone appointed in terms of Section 3(1)(a)(1), which is what they refer to in the press briefing, has to fall within an institution with a proper command and control structure that can properly discipline and control. Now, he also didn't answer the question whether they will continue to fall under the Gauteng Department of Community Safety, which I would say is illegal. If it would be under Gauteng Traffic, that's a whole different story. But then again, are they going to be traffic wardens or are they going to be illegally traffic officers? Because I do not think that they qualify in terms of the qualification. And what institutional structure is going to take responsibility for them? That institution has to do things like the legislation requires firearms competency training every 6 months. Who's going to do that for 9,400 people? It also requires that firearms be stored overnight and that officers don't have the firearms when they're not on duty. Is that being done? There are a lot of concerns and unanswered questions that remain in place. And unfortunately, the bottom line is that the provinces want to police, and the constitution and the legislative framework don't really allow that. And so if there is a desire for provinces to police, then the ANC, the government of national unity, should go to Parliament and write that legislation. And that may actually require a change to the constitution. because the Constitution currently does not permit provinces to run their own police services. They do have powers in terms of traffic, but not to run their own police services.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to try and read as quickly as I can, because I've got the Gazette here. They just sent it to me. But it says they are appointed under, in terms of Section 3A1B of the National Road Traffic Act of 1996. Yes. And they're saying under the Gauteng province, and they are saying the power conferred upon a peace officer in terms of Section 23(1)(a) of the Criminal Procedure Act of 1997, the power to arrest a person without a warrant in terms of Section 40(1)(a) and 1 of the Criminal Procedure Act. Does that give you any idea of what powers they are now having?
Yes, so that sounds like their powers have been slightly expanded to include the powers of arrest. As I don't have the Gazette in front of me, so that power will be in relation to specified offences. So you will need to then look at the column that talks about the offences, because it's not necessarily going to be all offences. And so, yeah, it still doesn't answer the question of which institution they fall under, because the Premier was evasive on that question. Who is going to take responsibility for firearms competency, for firearms licensing, if they are going to be armed? What institutional structure who's going to take responsibility for the disciplining? There's so many unanswered questions. And it also doesn't provide any consequences for the illegality up to now.
So the spokesperson, I don't know whether they're speaking in official terms, but I mean, he was saying something to the effect that, of course, the declaration is made by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development as the custodian. And the presence of the acting Minister of Police there means that these peace officers will be conducting their work under his watch. Does that make any sense?
No, well, they have to be within an institution in terms of the Road Traffic Act. Now, is that Gauteng Traffic? Is it the Metro Police Departments? Is it the National Road Traffic Unit? Which one is it? Because there isn't anything else that is empowered in terms of the law, and we don't have those answers. I think traffic officers would rightly be annoyed if people with lesser qualifications are elevated to their positions, and without actually seeing the full powers that they have been given. It's very hard to judge. But it's not just about the powers. It's about what is the institutional framework that is going to take responsibility for command and control. Who's their boss? Who do they answer to? That is not, that question has not been answered. And as I said before, the Constitution does not allow provinces as such to have police forces. That allows them to have traffic services. So, yeah, it seems like
it seems though. I know you don't have the Gazette there next to you. I mean, I'm trying to also read it quite quickly here as it got. Column 3 seems to put it within the National Road Traffic Regulations. So they're saying the offences referred to in Section 3J and 6.8 of the National Road Traffic Act of 1996 and Regulations 36, 212, 304, 305, 316, and 322 of the National Road Traffic Regulations.
That sounds like it's limited to traffic offences, and we'd have to compare it to the declaration for traffic officers generally to see how it is limited compared to traffic officers, whether, what the differences are. And that's going to require a little bit of analysis to looking up the offences and seeing what's going on. But as I said, it's not just about the powers, it's about the institution. Who is the institution that employs them? Is it Gauteng Traffic? Well, then that's okay. But is it? And does the declaration change the situation for all traffic wardens? Or is it only the Gauteng traffic wardens? So that is also a question.
So we know, for example, that the RTMC said they couldn't be fully accommodated there. And so where exactly will they be accommodated?
Precisely. And for me, the extremely important question is around firearms, because we know that firearms are a weak link in law enforcement structures where they are not properly controlled, where there's not proper competency, where they're not properly stored when people are not on duty. Then they are hired out and then they are used in crimes. And this is a very serious risk that we are facing. It's not necessarily a plus for crime in this kind of situation. We also don't know how well paid the wardens are, what kind of employment relationship exists. People who are very poorly paid may be tempted to supplement their income in some sort of way, especially if they don't have contractual certainty, which they would have if they were employed as a law enforcement or metro police officer in a municipality where there's some sort of certainty on their employment. That also hasn't been clarified by the Premier.
I appreciate your time, Doc, and thank you very much for coming on. Dr. Jean Redpath there, Senior Researcher at the Dulama Institute at the University of the Western Cape, responding, of course, to the briefing that we've just seen by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. This is a briefing hosted by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mamluku Kubai, alongside the Minister of Police, Firoz Kachalia, as well as the Premier of Gauteng, Amapanyaza. This, of course, emanates from the Premier having made a request to declare the status of the peace wardens, the traffic wardens, as peace officers, and declaring that status is what they would have undertaken with the Gazette that has been published now.